Boker Tov, good morning. Today is Friday, August 12th, Erev Shabbat, Vaetchanan, Shabbos, Erev Shabbos Nachmu. Today is Tu B'Av, a lot of nice things that relate to this day. And I wanted to have us consider the most important declaration that we make that finds itself in this week's parashah, in Vaetchanan, Shema Yisrael, the declaration and affirmation that God is our God and God is one, and Ve'ahavta, the mitzvah to love God, that's there. And we understand that there is indeed, as the Torah says, that we should speak about these things every day, twice a day, b'shach b'cha v'kumecha, when you lie down and when you rise up. And that is a mitzvah of Kriyat Shema, reciting the Shema. And the Gemara in Brachot spends a lot of time talking about different elements of this, including the need to, since it's supposed to be to really hear something, it's also comprehended. There's an obligation to say Shema with kavanah, with intent and focus. And there is therefore a major whole series of different opinions about how much of the Shema requires focus, because it's so hard for our wandering minds to retain focus. So the first line, more than the first line, the first paragraph, into the first paragraph, somewhere in the first paragraph, those are all different opinions that exist in the Gemara about Shema. The Gemara also has the statement in which it declares that you have to recite Shema. First, you have to be able to hear it. You should be trying to be able to hear it, to be audible. Shema Yisrael. Two opinions about if it wasn't audible. And then what if you were, how much you recite these words. The Gemara, the Mishnah continues, Karabalo diktek biotioteha. If you read Shema and you were not careful to enunciate all of the letters, so Rabbi Yossi says, your Yotzei, you still fulfill the mitzvah. Rabbi Yehuda says you didn't. You didn't. And if you look in your Art Scroll Siddur, you'll see there are lines put in between words throughout Shema to help ensure that you don't blend one word into the next word, especially if it changes the meaning. If you would blend them incorrectly and it sounds something different, things the Gemara describes. So these are all important conversations. So what happens when a Jew gets lost in fulfilling this mitzvah? What do I mean? I consider and I remember a gentleman in Virginia, a mathematician he was, who, brilliant man, who sat a few rows back to my left by the window, who was stuck in Shema. Sometimes it felt like for an eternity. I hear him, every bit, right, trying to make sure that every word was enunciated with great care. The rest of us were already, through the Amida, the silent meditation beyond, and he was still stuck there in that cycle. And I was 12 years old when this memory kind of embedded in my mind. And as I learned and as I studied in this past summer, in my psychosocial pathology and diagnosis course, I came to realize that here we saw what were very likely some form of an obsessive compulsive disorder in this man. That's not an official psychological assessment and diagnosis, certainly going back in years, but it reflects the essence of that. Sorry for the pause. So we've had a chance to learn a little bit about and study about the definition of obsessive compulsive disorder. Not to be confused with obsessive compulsive personality disorder, which is someone who needs to have things just so, to control certain things as well. That's different than the obsessive compulsive disorder, which is an anxiety disorder in which a person has obsessive thoughts, often coming to believe that they control, or their actions will impact, it's a better way to say, will impact something very important, someone's safety, perhaps their own, perhaps a loved one's safety, some calamity from taking place. And so those obsessive thoughts about the possibility of the calamity happening leads to a compulsive action, the one that they're supposed to take to help prevent it. And these are ever increasingly complicated rituals rigid actions that have to be performed in order to bring about some degree of abatement of those anxious feelings, but it doesn't. It just keeps on cycling more, and people get trapped in lots of ways. We're not here to discuss all the details of that. And so I realized this man was living with that in some way, about his Kriyat Shema, whatever it was that was in his head. I actually discussed this with a highly regarded expert in the field of treating OCD, Dr. Ken Gorfinkel, who used to live across the street from me and now lives in Manhattan. And I really wanted to know, tell me about more observant people, especially around mitzvot. And we discussed other cases. In the case that I asked him, tell me more, some Kriyat Shema recitation, OCD behavior. And he described one case in which his patient was caught up in the kavana side. I talked about the careful enunciation of the words. This one was caught up, individual was caught up in the kavana. Did I have sufficient? Did I have the right kavana? Each word throughout the Shema, and he was trapped in it and was given bad direction from rabbis as well, that you can just keep on going. Don't worry about end time. You can keep on enhancing this, because often, sadly, rabbis see someone who is obsessing around the performance of a mitzvah, and they see it as a virtuous relationship to the mitzvah, without realizing that there are alarm bells that might need to go off. So for this individual, what he needed to do was have a very different treatment, which was an exposure to not having kavanah and seeing whatever it was that he was imagining would have happened, not happen, if he didn't have the kavanahs that he thought, intentions that he thought he needed to have. And we talked more together, Dr. Gorfinkel and I, about how we look at mitzvot, how do we look at our rituals. And I think he captured something just in the right way. And we know that we all have rituals, but an OCD performance of Jewish ritual, right, is qualitatively different. When we do ritual mitzvot, it's meant to be a way to connect to the Torah and its story, to the community, to collective memory, to the will of God. But we do it in some way to try to be connected to God, to achieve transcendence. But when anxiety takes over, it becomes all about doing the ritual, fixated on the ritual in a very special and specific way. And you cross mental boundaries, you stop and think and rethink, and it moves from devotion to rigidity. And I think that was a really important distinction that we have to be conscious of in general, because many people that we know might tend towards this. Thankfully, not too many people that shouldn't say not too many. It is tragic for someone to have this disorder, but it can be treated. And more important for us then is to be aware of it if it arises in ourselves, when something has become a fixation. An anxious fixation, then to say something's not healthy in me, or to see it in someone else and say, "Ooh, I have to be conscious of whether I just keep on supporting this person's explorations, who's so deeply thrown into it, without stopping and saying, is this leading to, coming from, and leading to something deep and healthy, or is it reinforcing and building an anxiety disorder in them?" Because the mitzvot are not about anxiety. They are about a transcendent connection to God. And we're meant to do them carefully, and to have kavanah and focus when we say the Shema, and care in reciting the words. And we do so because the words matter, not because the fate of the planet or of my neshama or my soul depends upon this. And to believe that God wants me to live with that anxiety constantly would be a terrible misunderstanding of the purpose of our mitzvot. So do the mitzvot for the right reasons, and if you're aware of yourself or in others that it's about some anxious need, help yourself, get some help, so you can really return to the performance of the mitzvah for the purpose that it's meant to be, and for your own well-being. Wishing you all Shabbat Shalom.